recognized yet, so we'll see how it goes with that. So, yeah, that's my grand introduction for
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you. All right. So we're all set. We're recording and all that stuff. All right. Good. So I'm Jody Savage. I am a biologist and spent my career in the biotech industry. I went through an entire graduate program in biology without ever hearing one word about mites, which is interesting and typical, by the way. It's interesting because there are about 200 million species of plants and animals on this planet, and about half those species are mites. So ignoring them for a whole graduate program is an interesting choice. And we'll talk more about why mites get ignored. At any rate, my interest in mites came about because of an unfortunate experience with a particular species of parasitic mites called Dermanisis gallini. That was in 2009. And when that came about, because I'm a biologist, I was able to read up on studies from all over the world about that particular species and put together a protocol for how to get rid of them. So we'll talk about that as well. So in the process of putting together all that information and writing a book about the experience and the protocols, I spoke with a lot of entomologists who were experts in this particular field, and I learned a lot of spooky things about mites, and I'm going to share some of those with you tonight. So the first thing to know is that mites are everywhere. You might not see them because they're so small, but they are around. They're in soil, which is their ancestral home. They've lived in soil for about 400 million years. They're in water. They're in the flour that you bake with, that you keep in your cupboard. And they are also very emphatically in your sheets. And this picture is a picture of dust mites in a sheet eating dead skin cells. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a little cold. So, and the number, these things reproduce very rapidly. If you don't change your sheets once a week, the numbers of dust mites crawling around like that really skyrocket. So, something to keep in mind as you're changing your linens. Here's another spooky fact. They don't just live in the environment, they also live on animals. There are mites living in the nostrils of hummingbirds. There are mites living in the lungs of seals. And a lot of mites living these days in the thoraxes, if that's how you say the plural. Maybe I should say thorax, I don't know. Anyway, in the throats of bees and other stinging insects. And varroa mites in particular are the leading cause of collapse in beehives, which, as we probably all know, is quite a significant problem. So that's courtesy of the little guy on the right here. And you can also see a varroa mite right there on that bee. Excuse me. And mites live on us. There is a kind of mite called Demodex, which lives in facial hair follicles, lives in sweat glands, and they are not parasites, they're scavengers. They eat the gunk in your eyelashes, they eat all kinds of secretions on your face. I'm really sorry. And you can see what an unusual shape. See, this mite doesn't look like the other mites we've been looking at, does it? It's long and skinny, it has no legs, and in fact, it fits perfectly into a hair follicle right there. And the shorter ones fit into sweat glands. So they're on your face, and for a long time, it was thought that only about 18% of people harbored these mites. And that was back when people studying this species relied on using sticky paper and trying to catch whole mites off of people's faces. And they could only find them in about 18% of people. But these days, the newer studies, which are done with DNA analysis, with PCR analysis, have found that in fact, there are face mites on 100% of human beings. We all have them. We inherit them from our mothers at the time of birth, and you can't get rid of them. There isn't a way. You cannot. There is no way to get rid of them, no matter how clean you are. Make friends with your mites. I mean, they're kind of symbiotic. I mean, they're not doing you any harm. They're just cleaning you up, you know. Well, they are consuming gunk off your face. On the other hand, it was thought until pretty recently that this type of mite did not have an anus. And so the idea was that if they got really full, when they'd eaten a lot, that they would explode on your face. But for better or worse, it's recently been found that in fact they do have a small opening. And I don't know if it's better or worse that they're gradually doing this as opposed to exploding. I'm not sure which is worse. Okay, so those are Demodex mites. Those are, again, they live on us, but they're not parasites because they don't actually feed on us. They feed on our excretions. Another really interesting thing about mites is that there is one particular species called, I'm going to try to say it, Paratarsodomus macropalpus, which by one way of measurement is actually the fastest animal on Earth. And the way that that's calculated is that this type of mite can travel 322 times its body length per second. So if you measure speed in that way, in body lengths, that is way faster than the fastest human being. That is way faster than the fastest cheetah. You can see on this diagram, which I pulled out of Scientific American, here is the cheetah, way faster by that way of measuring than the human, but the mite goes all the way around the circle. So it's... They have, well, I think they have 8. I think they have 8 because they're arthropods. You know, they're. They just must really go. Yeah. Yes. So this leads to an interesting concept, which is that mites, because they're almost too small to see, they're about the size, a mite is about the size of not the head of a pin, but the point of a pin. And they are translucent unless they've recently fed. So imagine trying to see a piece of cellophane tape the size of the point of a pin. So if you're that small and you're moving quickly, you're not going to get picked up under a microscope very readily because you're going to go right across the slide, right? So how do you find these things until you get PCR analysis? It's pretty tough. It's pretty tough to find them. And that may be one reason that they're not more commonly studied among biologists. Now this, I'm not sure, is actually a spooky fact. I think this is a spooky opinion. There's a paleontologist named George Pointer, who is at UC Berkeley, who is credited with being the inspiration for Jurassic Park. George Pointer came up with the idea that you could, in fact, resurrect the dinosaurs by isolating dinosaur DNA in amber. But actually, as a side note, he thinks that reviving the dinosaurs would be a really terrible idea because, even though he came up with the thought, because he says, think about the pathogens that would unleash. You wouldn't just be reviving the dinosaur, you'd be reviving everything that fed on the dinosaur. And his theory is that the dinosaurs became extinct not because of an asteroid, but because of bugs. He thinks mites and other bugs were what did in the dinosaurs. I'm not sure that's a very well accepted theory, but I just put it in here because it's spooky. It belongs in a Halloween presentation. There you go. All right, now we're going to get into the really weird stuff. Mite reproduction is bizarre. And this example is the least bizarre of the ones we're going to talk about. The order Orbitida. These are mites that live in forest soil, and they have a density of up to 400,000 individuals per cubic meter in the soil of a forest. And they've been around for about 400 million years. So very successful. They're also long-lived for a mite. Some of them live months or even years, which is very interesting because for most mites, the lifespan is a couple weeks. At any rate, this order of mites reproduces by parthenogenesis, which means that the females reproduce without males and have only female offspring. And this is very rare among multicellular animals. But that's what these folks do, these mites. And actually, it's the sanest approach of the ones we're going to talk about, because the next one is the Adactylidium mite. And in that species, the female incubates 5 to 8 female offspring and 1 male offspring. And then the male mates with all the females, all of its siblings, before birth, and then the children eat their way out of the mother. Yeah. Let's get out of here. And then, interestingly enough, the females go on their merry way. They're, of course, already pregnant, and they can give birth within a matter of days. The male wanders off and dies because it doesn't eat anything once it's eaten its way out of the mom. So who's the winner here? Everybody's a loser, really. So I didn't make a slide for this other. I want to mention one more of these. This is a different order. There is a kind of mite where the males send off a packet of sperm encased in fungus, and it finds its way to the female reproductive tract where it explodes and impregnates the female. So, lots of different ways that mites reproduce, none of them pretty. It kind of makes you think that the parthenogenesis ones have a really good idea, Maybe that's the best. And then there's one more that I want to talk about. This is, I think, very interesting. It's another arthropod. This is way off topic because this is a spider, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. There's a kind of spider called H. sadistica, where the male mates with the female by piercing the carapace of the female, even though these females have a perfectly functional reproductive tract. And evolutionary biologists have a theory that the reason that these spiders do this is that they want to be sure that they're going to be the father of the offspring. And that way, since of course they kill the female in the process, they know that they're the dad. So, reproduction among arthropods is a little different than among people. So, okay. All right, so we'll stop talking about reproduction. Let's talk about something else. So, a lot of mites are parasites. We really haven't talked about parasites yet, but let's talk a little bit about that. One of my favorite books on this subject is Carl Zimmer's book, Parasite Rex, which is not just about mites. It's about lots of different parasites. Carl Zimmer is a science writer from the New York Times. Excuse me. And he says that there are more parasitic than free-living species of animals on this planet. And he also says that he thinks that Western medicine really underemphasizes the health effects of parasites because there's a bias toward thinking that parasites are, a problem of less developed countries, a problem of people who live in jungles, that kind of thing. And so when there are parasites in developed countries, it can happen that people have a hard time getting care. For example, it is well recognized that scabies mites parasitize humans. And you can see, here's a picture of these are scabies mites tunneling through skin. And over here you can see the result. And they really like the webbing between the fingers is their favorite place. And it can be tough to get a diagnosis, even for this one this type of mite, which is recognized widely as a human parasite. When my youngest child is adopted from an orphanage in Vietnam and came to us with scabies mites, and we were told for a long time that it was eczema. But then when I started developing blisters between my fingers, caring for my child, it happened that I was working for a man named Babatunde Otulana, who's an MD from Nigeria. And I went and showed, I said, I was wearing Band-Aids between my fingers, but I took them off and I went into his office. I said, is this scabies? Because I'm starting to wonder if I've caught scabies from my daughter. And he said, yeah, absolutely, that's what that is. So then I could get care once I had that identification from a physician who had come from Africa, where it's more prevalent. So, yeah. But it's quite prevalent in orphanages in many parts of the world. All right, that was a side.
Parasitizes, I'm not familiar with that word, so what does that mean exactly?
Oh, parasitizes? It means that they feed, it just acts as a parasite. It feeds on a host organism. Okay. So a parasite is an animal that feeds on a living host. I mean, like if I have a steak, I'm not considered a parasite, but an animal that feeds on a living host is considered a parasite. So it's just making a verb out of that word.
What would be another example than mice?
Of an ectoparasite?
Yeah.
Oh, a mosquito is an ectoparasite. A flea is an ectoparasite. A bed bug is an ectoparasite.
Okay, and a chigger?
A chigger is definitely an In fact, I think a chigger is a mite. I'm not sure about that. I should look that up. But I thought that a chigger was a mite.
What's the definition of mite?
Well, that's a good question. So so if you think about arthropods, right? That includes lots of different things. It includes spiders, it includes bees, it includes ants, it includes butterflies. But the acari are the mites, and the mites and the ticks are, so underneath the top level of arthropod, the next level down is, for this group, is the acari, and within the acari there are the ticks and the mites. And in the mites, there are two different body types. Actually, there's more than that because, obviously the Demodex is a really strange example, but there's a kind that's where the body type is round and has 8 legs, and there's a kind that has a more developed head, but also has 8 legs. But yeah, I'm not an entomologist, and I can't really tell you more definitively than that. They're all really small. They're not all parasites. A lot of them are free living, and they've been around a long time. They're very successful. But that's a really good question. I don't have a full answer for that, unfortunately. At any rate, not every doctor knows how to recognize scabies, much less the less familiar types of mites that can be parasites on people. So we're going to talk now about Dermanisis gallinae, which is a species of mite that I am more familiar with than I would like to be. Up here on the screen, you can see the life cycle of the Dermanisis gallinae from egg all the way through several larval stages to adult. They infest many wild birds. For example, 99% of pigeons carry D. gallinae. And according to some estimates, I've seen lower estimates, but according to some estimates, over 90% of commercial poultry operations have infestations. And this species of mite can carry encephalitis, it can carry salmonella, it can carry the bacterium that causes Lyme disease. So this is not a good situation. And it's very expensive for the poultry industry. The latest estimate I could find was 130 million pounds a year. That was from 2005, but I'm sure the number is bigger now because the prevalence of these mites is increasing. Unlike many kinds of insects, we've been reading about how insect populations are being decimated by global warming, but the opposite is happening with ticks and mites. The numbers are going up. The range is increasing because these particular bugs love hot, humid weather, like we have in North Carolina. And with this kind of mite, birds can lose 3%, a heavily infested bird can lose 3% of its blood per night. And the mites themselves, if they're not able to feed, can go months without feeding. They can fast for months and survive. They're extremely hardy.
Cooking helps, though, right?
Cooking?
Yes.
If you cook a chicken?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what happens with, that's an interesting question. As soon as a host animal dies, the mites jump off and find another host. They don't wait around to be cooked.
Okay.
And another interesting thing is that mites will choose a favorite. Let's say you have a backyard hen house, and you have 10 hens. Well, they might pick one particular hen, usually one that has lots of feathers. They like fluffy stuff, so they pick a hen with lots of feathers, lots of places to hide, and then they excrete a pheromone that attracts other mites, and they end up congregating on one chicken. They feed on it until it's can't move because it doesn't have much blood, and then they just keep feeding on that one until it's gone. So a chicken farmer might find a dead hen that is totally bloodless.
So how does it get into the human food chain?
I'm sorry?
You says it causes encephalitis.
Yes.
So how does it get into the human?
Well, we're going to talk about that. That's a great lead into next slide, which is talking about D. gallini as an underrecognized human parasite. So physicians in Europe are finding that D. gallini affects poultry workers as well as people living or working near poultry. This picture is from a Yale University article about North Carolina poultry facilities. North Carolina now produces, according to this article, I find this mind-boggling, but according to this article from Yale, 500 million chickens a year, compared with 9 million hogs. So an enormous poultry industry here in North Carolina with, according to the article, minimal regulation. So we have the potential for poultry workers in this state to be heavily affected by these mites.
They're already can be heavily affected by the disinfectants and things that are used. And someone was telling me recently that Peter and I live in Siler City, where we have a major chicken plant.
Oh, really?
And we see truckloads filled with chickens going to slaughter.
They're alive when they pass you by? And then they're slaughtered at the...
But someone told me that pregnant women who work there have miscarriages or children born with birth defects.
Oh, wow.
This is a little better than hearsay. I don't have good science data on it.
Okay.
But I would like to learn more.
Well, they're probably using heavy disinfectants because, again, if they're slaughtering chickens in that volume,
And they're coming straight from that.
it's very likely that, they have mites coming off of those, at least some of those chickens, who are then trying to find a new host.
1,600 employees, 3 shifts a day,
Wow.
sometimes 6 days a week.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, usually I think 6 days a week.
It's right now, the major industry.
In Siler City?
The second biggest employer after the school system, I think.
Wow,
Wow, yeah.
that particular plant. Wow.
And it is a relative modern plant, genuinely.
Okay. So there are a couple problems here. One is, again, let's make the assumption for the moment, I don't have any data about this, but let's make the assumption that at least some of these chickens are coming in with D. gallini. So then it can lead to, if poultry workers are being bitten, then they can also, these diseases that D. gallini carry can also be transmitted to these folks. There's a group of scientists. See, this is much more heavily studied in Europe than it is here, and I don't know the reason for that. But a group of scientists in Europe called CORAMI is focused on these occupational hazards, and it's in a way complicated in Europe because a lot of the miticides that are still legal in the U.S. have been banned in Europe because of the danger of the miticides to people, and they've also when they used to have cages for birds, and when they put them all together, as in this picture in North Carolina, then the transmission rate for mites, of course, goes up because the chickens are much in very close contact with one another all the time. So, crowded conditions are perfect for the transmission of mites and therefore for other diseases as well. So that's the situation here.
That explains the free health care in the plant.
Oh, they have free health care. Interesting. I wonder if they have, well, we're going to talk about diagnostics for mites, but they may or may not be able to identify very well what's happening if people are coming in with skin rashes, complaining about a biting sensation, etc.
Misdiagnose that for the infected.
They could think it's that. A lot of people who have been exposed to mites get misdiagnosed as having scabies because the physicians have heard about scabies, they haven't heard about this. And the treatments for scabies don't do much for this problem. So getting back to the point that from Carl Zimmer's book about how Western medicine tends to ignore parasites, this paper, the lead author, Maria Assunta Califero, is a physician in Italy, where apparently this is quite a problem. This article is talking about the gap. When it says mind the gap, as folks from England know, that's usually referring to the gap between the platform and the train, right? And in this case, the gap she's talking about in this article is the gap between the reality, excuse me, of workers. She's talking specifically about poultry workers being infested with this particular mite, and the lack of awareness of physicians about the problem. So that's what this journal article is about, and I want to read you a little bit from the summary. She says, there are a number of reasons why diagnosis of D. gallini infestation in humans is likely to be underestimated. First, medical specialists are not well aware of infestations in humans. The problem is compounded by misdiagnosis and the lack of diagnostic tools. And, this is kind of a vicious cycle because the mites are under-recognized in biological education, in medical education, and they're misdiagnosed, then there isn't very little funding to find out more about what's actually going on. So you don't have things like good diagnostic tools, which tends to compound the problem. Here's another article. Should the poultry red mite, Dermanisis gallini, be of wider concern for veterinary and medical science? This lead author on this article, David George, wrote the foreword for my book. He's an English entomologist, and Graham's met him too. We visited with him when we were in England one time. So he's pointing out that what has been historically referred to as bird mites has been shown through studies to infest cats, dogs, rodents, rabbits, horses, and humans. So he's talking in this article about genetic plasticity. That's the idea that an animal that is rapidly reproducing, in particular, such as these mites, can adapt. It can, for example, it can evolve around pesticides. Pyrethrins, which have been used historically to treat for these infestations, is becoming less and less effective, sort of in the way that, that bacteria can evolve around antibiotics. It doesn't happen quite as quickly because, it takes a couple weeks for mites to reproduce, whereas bacteria are a lot faster, but still, given, over the years, these species can evolve around pesticides, and they also can be take advantage of opportunities and evolve to adapt to new hosts. So even though these were called bird mites, they actually have been shown to infest lots of different organisms, including us. So that's that one. So I wanted to talk a little bit about ways that you can lower your chances of having a problem with these mites. Probably the most important thing is if you have birds' nests on your house, it's a really good idea to get rid of them. And an abandoned bird nest in particular can be a source, can be a vector, because once the baby birds are gone, the mites that are in the nest need something to eat, and they'll go try to find something else, and that could be you. So get rid of birds' nests on your house, sanitize the area where the bird's nest has been. Also, mites love a hot, warm environment. So if you're able to keep your home cool and dry, if you can get a whole house dehumidifier on your house, you can lower your chances that your house will be hospitable to mites. Mites love...
We talked about the ticks, the surefire way to kill the ticks is to put the clothes in the dryer and run them.
Yeah.
Hot and dry. Does that work also for the mites?
It kind of works. I mean, the dry part is good. The problem with trying to get rid of mites that way, and there are people who will come out. You can hire people to come out and heat treat your house, and it's sort of like, do you know that? What's that poem about the guy in Alaska? Do you know the poem I'm talking about? And he's a gold prospector, and he complains about how cold he is, and he finally freezes to death. And they go to, it's the cremation of Sam McGee. Do you know this poem? And they put him in the crematorium, and he sits up and says, "This is the first time I've been warm since I got to Alaska." And that's kind of how mites are, You have these people come in and they say, "We're going to heat treat your house," and they heat it all up, and they keep it all hot all day, and, everything warps in your house. And you walk back in and it's like, oh yeah, we loved it. We're all awake now, we're moving around, we're ready to bite, So I'm not sure about the dryer. I'm not sure. I mean, drying something out is good, but I'm not sure that a dryer gets hot enough to do the trick. All right, so what else? Get rid of clutter. They love places to hide. They love stuffed animals, throw pillows, rugs. You want your house to, if you're really serious about making sure you never get these things, you want to be kind of Spartan in the way your house looks. Get rid of your carpeting. I communicated for a while with a woman whose children had brought a bird nest into their house. They thought it was really cool that, they found this bird's nest, they brought it into the kitchen, and she became their favorite host. And the rest of the family wasn't really being bitten, but she was being bitten terribly. And by the time I talked with her, she had shaved her head. So don't bring bird's nests into your house. If you have rodents, squirrels, bats in your house, If you have pigeons nesting, if you, like, you know, in New York, a lot of people, New York City, a lot of people have pigeons nesting under their balcony, get rid of them.
So why do cats and dogs get a free pass in your view?
Well, they shouldn't actually get a totally free pass. I mean, if you think about it, dogs often bring home ticks, don't they, after they've been out running around? And I suppose they could bring home mites too. And again, we know that dogs can be infested by these things. So, and mange is that, you know, if you're familiar with mange, the condition that dogs get where they lose their fur, that's a mite infestation. It's not this mite. But yes, you're right. Dogs and cats don't get a free pass. If you keep poultry, which frankly, in my opinion, is a terrible idea, but if you keep backyard poultry, you should be bathing them with a miticide shampoo. They do make those. They make miticide shampoos for birds. You can get a loop, you know, that little magnifier, and inspect for mites on your poultry. And if you have a poultry house in your backyard, it's best to have a different pair of shoes that you wear when you go out there, and then change shoes when you get to your back door. But again, I think it's a rotten idea. You know, that's how I got them. So it was from backyard poultry. So I don't think it's worth it.
After the war, we used to keep rabbits in the back garden, but that was just food.
Okay. They didn't lay eggs, did they?
It's only the Easter Bunny.
No, oh yeah, that's right. That's right. Chocolate eggs only. So,
Mixed potatoes is what killed them all off.
Jody, when I was a kid, growing up on farm, we had chickens in the
Yeah.
house.
yeah,
And it was for the children, one of our chores was to go collect the eggs.
yeah,
And you put your hand in under the chicken to get the egg, and you come out covered with little creepy crawly things. We called them mites. Were those probably mites?
they probably were.
And
But they didn't take up residence? You didn't get bitten all night?
not that I...
That's good.
Not enough to keep me awake.
Good.
We weren't instructed to carefully watch. I mean, well, which you...
Wow.
But, I mean, there's no way to go back and find out what was going on.
Yeah, that would be fascinating to know.
Mother and Daddy, bless their hearts, are long gone.
Yeah.
But, I mean, they're the ones Daddy's the one who called them mites.
Oh,
And it was just
But you can see them.
you could see them.
Little bitty things. I
Yeah,
don't remember being bitten I mean, it was just creepy.
that sounds creepy. I don't know what that would have been, but it might have been mites. But if you could see them, it probably meant that they had just fed. Because otherwise they would likely have been too small to see, if they were mites. Now, chickens also can be hosts on their bodies for bed bugs. But it doesn't sound like they weren't big enough. Were they like the size of a sesame seed, or were they smaller?
Possibly even smaller.
Yeah, I don't know then. They could have been. There are lots of things they could have been. But that wasn't good. No. Ick. Okay. All right. So those are all things you can do to lower your chances of being bitten by mites. But if you do become infested, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It is a lot harder to get rid of them than it is to just prevent them in the first place. Of course, you would have to get rid of vectors. I mean, at this point, I would, to your point, Mike, at this point, I'd start thinking, do I really need to have this dog or cat? Certainly pet birds would go. And again, anything in the house that could be a vector. If there are mice in the basement, that's step zero, is to get rid of any potential source. And then diagnosis. Now, if you're getting bitten by something you can't see, it's likely that it's mites. but it's difficult to locate specimens. When we had, back in California, my ex-partner and I had a significant problem in our home that was related to having poultry. It took 4 months, even though it was a big-time infestation, it took 4 months to catch a specimen. And back then, there wasn't a readily available way to get a PCR test. We had, here in North Carolina, we had a much smaller problem at one point related to a bird's nest. And this picture here shows that we were able to get a PCR positive test only for Dermanisis gallinae. Everything came back negative, but Dermanisis gallinae came back positive. But this is not easy. It's not easy to find a lab that will do PCR testing for mites. I'm only aware of this one in the whole country. No, actually, they're not registered with FDA. They are not allowed to process anything from the person. So like this particular swab was a swab of the bed. And then I also swabbed my laptop and I swabbed my desk, and all 3 of them came back positive. But you can't swab yourself. They're not allowed to test anything from people. But there were enough around that all 3 of those came back positive. What else about this slide? And another thing to keep in mind is we talked earlier that it's not possible to get rid of the Demodex on your face, but it is possible to get rid of D. gallinae. It's a co-infestation of the environment and the person, so you have to work on both at the same time, and that's what we're going to talk about now. You have to make your environment very mite unfriendly. I bought a Honda Element that had rubber floors and plastic seats. That's a little picture of a Honda Element here. I scrubbed it every day on the inside. I vacuumed it and scrubbed it down with Clorox wipes every day. Got rid of all the rugs, got rid of the curtains and replaced them with blinds. Put mite-proof coverings on all the mattresses and pillows. I believe I even got rid of upholstered furniture and got leather upholstered furniture. The whole thing was, of course, very expensive. It's not the kind of thing that a person with a poultry worker income could do. So it's at least a middle-class person's enterprise to get rid of an infestation like this. I am not by nature, Graham will tell you this, I'm not a super cleanly person. I don't love to clean. But when I had this issue, I vacuumed every day. I scrubbed the floors every day. I wiped down my car every day. I washed everything. If I wore something once, it went into the wash with hot water, borax, bleach, or color flask bleach if it couldn't tolerate bleach. Dry on hot, to your point. But the thing is, no one thing is going to get rid of them. You have to keep doing this over and over, which is why my book is called The Year of the Mite, because it took a year of doing these things over and over to get rid of them. And you have to clean yourself too. If a person has mites, here's another thing that would make it a lot harder for someone with a poultry worker income. Swimming in a chlorinated pool. I swam in a chlorinated pool every day when I had them, and that was helpful. That's something I had access to because I was working in biotech and I could, afford a gym membership. I bought washable shoes. I threw out all my leather shoes. I replaced them with Keens and other kinds of shoes that you can run through the washing machine. If I wore shoes one day, they went to the wash. So those are some of the things that were helpful at the point when I was dealing with this. So, yeah. Yeah. Wear shoes around the house because it's really common for mites to be on the floor. Well, they get into your, they start biting your feet. If you're walking around barefoot, you get bitten on your feet. Huh? Socks are great for mites because, again, they're cozy. They have lots of places to hide. So, yeah. Flip-flops work well. You can toss those in the wash.
So what's a tar shampoo?
Tar shampoo, it's like T-Gel is a brand of, Neutrogena makes something called T-Gel shampoo. So tar shampoo is an old-time remedy for mites. I don't know what the mechanism is, but that's been around a long time. People have been.
So just look for something that has an ingredient of tar in it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. T-Gel, that Neutrogena makes T-Gel, which is 2% tar. Smells nasty, but it, But again, it's not like you just do it once. You just have to keep doing it over and over. And of course, get a really short haircut is the other thing. Because, yeah, you're all set. You're just all set. Okay. Yeah, and the same, by the way, chickens when chickens have mites in their coop, their feet are often very heavily infested. Because the mites are crawling around on the floor and the little things that they stand on.
So those just like you anywhere, huh? They like it anywhere, the mice do. They'll bite your fingers, your feet, just.
Yeah.
Ticks kind of seem to want to crawl to a warm spot or someplace that you can't find them.
Ticks want to crawl where your elastic is.
Yes. Chiggers, tight spot.
Oh, chiggers too? They like elastic? Yeah.
They just like the tightness.
Uh-huh, yeah.
Are hay lice mites?
No, they're lice. That's a different thing. Yeah. Yeah, they are larger. Yeah. No fun though, but yes. And I'm not sure if head lice, what do head lice, I don't know much about them. Do they qualify as a parasite? Do they bite people or do they do?
Rather frequent in first, second, third grade.
Yeah. I remember when my kids had them, but I don't remember whether they had bites from them. But yeah.
And that is tar shampoo.
Tar shampoo is good for that too. Oh, okay. Good. Very good. All right. So, of course, you always want to use the least toxic methods to get rid of these that will work for you. But certainly, miticides are another component of a full program of getting rid of these things. So a pest control operator can't just come in and treat a house with miticides. Legally, they have to have a species identification because of the strength of the pesticides that are used. And so, of course, that's problematical unless you have access to PCR diagnostics. And even then, a lot of pest control operators really prefer their old methods of, they give you a piece of flypaper and they say, put this in the room and, if mites crawl onto this, then we can come treat your house. Well, they might crawl onto there and they might not. Another issue we've talked about is that mites are evolving around pyrethrins, which are one of the mainstays of the arsenal of a pest control operator. But pest control operators also use a kind of growth hormone that prevents mites from progressing. Remember we looked at that chart with the 5 different life stages? The egg and then all the 3 different larval stages and then the adult. If they don't get to the adult stage, they can't reproduce. So that doesn't mean that they're killing what's in your house, but if they can't reproduce and they only have a 2-week lifespan, well, that's a good thing. So it can be useful to enlist a pest control operator, even if the mites in a dwelling are pretty much immune to pyrethrins. So those are all things to think about with regard to professional pest control operators. There's now also a product that you can order from a company called Do It Yourself Pest Control. You can order online. That doesn't require species identification. And it's called Sterifab, and it was developed for use when people rent furniture, especially upholstered furniture, and then they return it. Well, it could be returned with, what people are really worried about, of course, is bed bugs. But it turns out that Sterifab, which is used to spray rental furniture when it's returned, is also a miticide. It's composed of isopropyl alcohol plus a couple of different pesticides. So that's something to keep in mind in the very unfortunate event that you ever need access to pest control for mites. Anything else about this? I think that's, and the other thing about Sterifab is that you have to really follow the directions, which means you have to wear a mask, you have to wear long sleeves, gloves, and a hat, and then put all of that stuff in the wash and scrub down afterwards because it is toxic. And that's what I've got, folks. That's 13 spooky facts about mites, and I did publish a book about it, which has protocols that worked back in 2009, but I've learned more since then because I do keep up on this stuff, and if you ever want up-to-date protocols, there's my website, yearofthemite.com. So there you go. Is everybody itchy now? Yeah, good.
Well, I'm totally spooked out.
Okay.
If I figure out whether I got a whole crate of peach gel that has for sale.
Oh, yeah.
There would seem to be some very serious money for a pharmaceutical company and lab tests, from what I'm hearing.
Yeah, because yeah. And there is some research going on. There's research going on. I'll tell you what's going on. There are people in a couple different countries, including Denmark, trying to develop a vaccine, a chicken vaccine, that would immunize chickens against D. gallini. So that's one thing. That would be good, although, of course, the big reservoir is wild birds because they've all got it. So that's happening. There is a push to develop anti-mite mRNA products for beekeepers to use against varroa mites. So that's happening. Somebody is trying to develop, we talked about the fly paper from the pest control operators. Somebody's trying to develop a kind of fly paper that would include pheromones. We talked about how these mites get on one chicken and they signal their buddies, right? So if you had fly paper that had those pheromones on it, then you would have a much better chance of actually capturing mites. So there's a certain amount of research going on, but you're right. I mean, it seems like with this being such a big hit to the poultry industry, that there'd be a lot more research going on.
It's interesting. I met a couple of folks from our large operation.
Oh, from the big chicken plant? Yeah.
I can see an interesting conversation coming up.
Yeah,
I
good.
wonder why they were so public about, as they were recruiting, we've got great salaries and free health care.
Yeah.
Great salaries, good, $15, $16 an hour.
Okay.
Care and in plant.
Yeah. See, the interesting thing to find out would be, do the healthcare providers in that plant know about this? Have they seen these articles?
What's the symptoms that you have? Like, you have like the scabies looking thing between your fingers?
No, that was earlier. That was back in 2000 when I adopted my youngest. It does at first, but, so we didn't talk about this, but mites actually are capable of immunosuppressing their host. And the reason that that's evolutionarily valuable is that, okay, think about that chicken that has a bunch of mites on it, right? And the mites are trying to basically bleed it to the point where it's a smorgasbord, right? So they're ingesting live blood, and they're biting the same chicken over and over. So the chicken is going to mount an immune response, right? And then what's going to happen is those blood cells are inside the mite, and the mite is being attacked from the inside by its food, right? So that's not good. So over the millions of years, mites have developed a way of immunosuppressing, because, think about if you get bitten by a mosquito, the mosquito's taking something out of you, but it's also leaving protein behind, right? So mites leave behind a protein, or at least this species leaves behind a protein that dulls the immune response to the mite.
Okay. Making it so that there's not a big welt or whatever.
So at first, at least that's my experience anyway, at first you get bites all over. And then after maybe you've been bitten for a couple weeks, not so much. Pretty soon it's invisible. Pretty soon you're not mounting an immune response anymore. But what you do, the way you know you still have them, is that you have the sensation of being stuck by a pin every time they bite you. And if you're at the height of it, I was having that sensation about every 20 seconds. Yeah. So yeah, it's pretty clear to the person experiencing it, but again, it's hard to demonstrate.
I wonder if people just get used to that. I mean, I wonder how many people can walk around with an infestation and not know it. It's just like always something that they had.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, like how you would acclimate to that.
It was definitive that you're like, ow, I can feel that.
Yeah, it would wake me up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I don't know how you would acclimate to it, but maybe some people don't have. I was the favorite, yeah. They were getting bitten, but not like me. Yeah, but not like me.
Now,
So-
which mite is this? Because I thought you said most of them feed off of dead skin, so it's not.
That was a different species. That was the Demodex. Yeah, so there are mites that are free living that eat, dead leaves or eat, dead mushrooms or stuff like that. Then there are the symbiotic ones that eat stuff like dead skin cells. The one little more closer to home are the ones that live on your face and eat your gunk, but they're still not parasites. The parasites are the ones that actually feed on the living host, like a mosquito, yeah, a tick that bites you, and this kind of mite, the Dermanisis gallini, formerly called the poultry mite. Some entomologists refer to it now as the red mite. Feeds directly, eats living red blood cells.
So like dust mites, equals blood.
No. But dust mites can cause other problems. Dust mites can, if somebody only is changing their sheets once a month and they're getting a big collection of dust mites in their sheets, even though the dust mites are not biting them, they can still cause things like an asthmatic reaction. They can cause a skin rash. People can develop an allergy to them, but they're not parasitic.
Wow, I have no idea there were so many different kinds of mites.
There are, there are 200 million species on the planet, about 100 million species of mites. Yeah.
Darwin
Darwin, that's right.
My
Just
daughter,
under different
I
circumstances.
don't know if I told you this before, my daughter worked in a lab with fruit flies
Yeah?
and studying fruit fly genetic and stuff or whatever, and she ended up with, I think we went to see her, and it was like, why don't you have your wedding ring on? And she's like, oh no, I have to do that at home, because the mites from the fruit flies like to crawl up under there, and then she showed like she had like a ring
Oh, wow.
of flesh being eaten or whatever.
Wow. What kind of mite lives on a fruit fly? I don't know. I'm not familiar with that.
You might read from the honey throats to the fruit.
I don't know. Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, well, now we can all be itchy all night.